is interested in getting the recording after, please just contact me and I'll forward it on to them, no problem at all. Especially tonight, if there is issues, I suppose, with people logging in, and again, I don't know why that may be. Again, ordinarily we'd have a bigger crowd than what we have tonight, but at the same time, with the numbers that we have, it potentially allows for more interaction with both Jason and Peter as we proceed. Just before, as I mentioned, just before I do hand you over to Jason to get into the bones of the presentation tonight, good news on Friday for us all. On the 29th of June, we're allowed back training in the clubs. So they've outlined, the GAA have outlined in cooperation with their advisory group that will work in groups of 10 with no more than 2 coaches. And then from the 31st of July, we're back to games. Okay, so there will be juvenile games and there'll be adult games from the 31st of July. That will include your GO games and a juvenile program of games as well, leading through from the 31st of July and through until September. So as the time goes on, folks, okay, information is being fed through to us, I suppose, at this stage, nearly every other day. So as information comes through to us in terms of guidelines and protocol around what we need to do as coaches on the ground, we'll pass that information on at the end of this month. And just before we do get back to activity, we'll hold a webinar around all the criteria that we all need to adapt at this stage and be aware of. So when I have the information to hand, and when I have a full range of the criteria, then we'll host a webinar to inform everybody at that stage. As it stands at the moment, I do have a safety return document that was issued to us, and included with the resources that Jason and Peter will supply off the back of this webinar. I'll also include that safety document in the email tomorrow. It's a 15-page document. It's detailed, and I'd advise everybody just to have a look through that so that we're all aware of what's coming down the track. So good news all round. And again, as I say, as the information is made available to us, we will in turn then pass the information on to everybody else and get everybody up to speed in terms of what the requirements are from the GAA. Just before I do hand you over to Jason tonight, if I could just advise you of the system and the workings of the system. Again, I'm sure everybody's familiar at this stage, but just in terms of our interaction with the lads as we progress through tonight. If you scroll 3/4 the way down on your page, you will see there's a taskbar, and looking from right to left, you have a camera and a microphone. As it stands at the moment, everybody's on mute, and that's just to allow the best possible coverage and sound quality for everybody that's on the call. Leading over from to the right of that, there's a new function in there. It's a raise your hand function. So at any stage, if you'd like to ask a question or pose a comment, then please you can raise your hand, and at that stage both Jason and Peter will call you in, open up your mic and your camera if required, and pose the question to the lads. Alternatively, there's a show conversation tab just to the next to that. In there, you can pose any questions, and like all the rest of the webinars that we've been involved with, if there is a situation where the lads don't get to answer the question tonight, or if perhaps it's too complex to answer in a few sentences, the lads will follow up again and answer any questions that you may have. So right now, folks, that's it from me at the moment. I'll pop in again at the very end. So if you just bear with me for the next 10 seconds, Jason is going to unshare his screen. I'm going to share mine, and I'm going to drive the presentation for the lads. So the next voice you're going to hear after mine is going to be Jason's, followed by Peter. So I hope that everyone enjoys the presentation tonight. Everybody takes something from it, an important area, no doubt, especially when everybody's been out of action for the last 10 to 12 weeks. Okay, so Jason, you might just confirm that you can see the opening slide.
Yeah, all good, Mike.
Okay, Jason, over to you.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Mike. And welcome to everyone on the line. So, Mike, there's just a double sound there. Is that the same for you, or is it just me?
Potentially there, and all right, Jason. Yeah, so I'm just going to mute everyone, and you might just open up your mic then again, and Peter, obviously.
Okay.
I'll mute my own as well. All right, okay, Jason, if you want to give it a go. You're muted there now, Jason. You might just open up your mic. You might do so as well, please, Peter.
Okay. Apologies about that, everyone. Okay, so just before we get started on tonight, this is our third time delivering the GAA 15 Prep to Perform workshop over the last 12 months. We've delivered it 3 different ways. The first time we delivered it in the Centre of Excellence with more practical based. Okay, the second time we done a practical and we done a theory base in Haywood, and tonight we're doing it on the virtual world that is the new norm on Teams. What we would like is to get feedback from everyone on the call on this. If this is something that you think worked well, and if not, possible ideas for us on how we could deliver this going forward. But just to get started on tonight, guys, so we're going to keep it very simple. We're going to go through the why you would warm up, how to warm up, what's involved in the warm-up, and then we're going to provide you with examples of warm-ups. With the why, we're going to touch on the most recent research in the field. There is very limited research, particularly from a GAA aspect, and particularly from a youth and child aspect. There's very limited research. So we're going to go through that in detail. We're going to then describe the key framework around what we would advise you program your warm-up with. We're going to go through the exercises involved in that framework. And again, like we said, we'll just touch on the examples. Okay, so Mike, you can move on.
You might just allow, I heard a beep there, Jason. You might just allow the person that's waiting in the lobby in, please.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, and as we look at this photo, what we're seeing here is it's an image, guys, of the Laois team. Obviously, we know that, but what we're seeing is the injury rate that the paper we're going to discuss and the papers we're going to go later in the presentation tells us, and it's telling us that players who do not perform warm up, okay, are at higher injury risk. It's telling us that throughout a season, 5 players for every 15. So 1 in 3 players will get an injury. Now, that can be sporadically throughout the year. Okay, it's not saying that all 5 players will be injured at once, but it can be sporadically throughout the year. But if there is a scenario where, and we can all bring this back to our clubs, if there is a scenario where we've 3, 4, potentially 5 players injured, you know, the chances of us being successful are going to be very, very slim. So what we're going to try and do tonight is document the reasons around doing a warm-up and the particular exercises we would recommend for injury prevention. So at this stage, I'd pass you over to Peter, who's going to go through some of the research.
Thanks, Jason. Jason, you can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So, guys, so what we're going to look at here is just the research is limited, but as Jason has alluded to already, but there's just a couple of studies that have been done before the one that we're going to look at. There's one particular one done by a colleague of ours there, Sean Kelly from Kilkenny. He's a GDA with Kilkenny, but he has done research in the area. But before his research over the last number of years, there has been studies. So this particular study here, so you can just see here that there was a total of 227 injuries in this particular study, of which the lower extremity, which is the lower body, there has been 67%, 151 lower extremity injuries that this particular study reported. Okay, Mike, if you want to keep clicking there. So, so ultimately, another way of looking at that 67%, every 14.75 hours in every 1,000 hours there was an injury. You can keep clicking, Mike. So then how was those injuries further broken down? And this again relates to the left-hand side of your screen. So knee, there was 33 injuries in the knee region of the body. There was 26 injuries from the hand. Now, obviously, that's something as conditioners, as coaches, that we can't really avoid. Ultimately, it's a physical game that we play. So 26 were from the hand. 22 hamstring injuries occurred from this particular study. And the next stat you can see there, that's fine, Mike. The next stat you can see there is there's a higher risk in a match scenario than there is in training. Now, I suppose, why is that? In training, it's more of a controlled environment, isn't it? You know, we plan the sessions, we plan what we're going to do, we plan when there's going to be contact in our training. In a match, it's way more random. Sure, nobody knows what's going to happen in a game. So it's a little bit higher. It's 21% in a match from this particular study. So what the 68 represents is that there was a player getting injured every 68 minutes. That's ultimately what I mean from this particular study. Okay, so these are previous studies, and it is limited enough. So, Mike, if you just want to move on there, the next slide, guys, really represents the results from Sean Kelly's study. So Sean studied in IT Carlow. He did a master's in this area of warm-ups and physical conditioning. So, Mike, if you just want to go back one, thanks. So what Sean did basically was he went around to post-primary schools in Wexford, Kilkenny, Carlow and Laois. He picked certain schools, post-primary schools, and he went in and he worked with the coaches, the teachers that were working with the senior teams, the senior hurling teams in those schools, in these particular schools. And what he had was he had two groups. He had a control group, which he had no influence on at all. He just used those as a control. And then he had a selection of schools that were an intervention group. Now, what does that mean? Ultimately, he went into the school. He upskilled the coaches on the GAA 15 protocol, how to use it, what exercises to put in the warm up, and he basically he basically asked all players from the control and intervention to use a smart-based app where he could monitor all the activity that the players were doing, and this ultimately is how he found his results. So from the control group, it was noted by Sean that 15.83 hours, every 15.83 hours there was an injury out of 1,000. While in the control, it was a lot less. It was 8.78 hours. And Mike, if you want to just move on. So from the intervention control compared to control, injuries were down 45%. So what we're saying here, it could be read as that doing a GAA 15 warm-up with your team and carrying out the exercise properly, you potentially could reduce your injury by 45%. Okay, and if you just look over to the left-hand side of your screen, so you can see that the school training and the club training. So the school training, the control group, which Sean didn't have any influence over how the team were warmed up, it was higher than the intervention group, which is the orange. Okay, so what we just went over on the right, we're just representing in a bar chart. And then if you look at that compared to the club trend, and then the match with the school compared to the club. Now, with the match rate of injuries, you can see that the rate of injuries is higher in a match than that of trend. And the previous studies have shown that also, that there's a higher risk of getting injured in a match than there is in trend. Okay, but again, you can see that in the intervention group during a match scenario, it is less than the control. Okay, Mike, you just want to click once more. So it's 30% less in a match scenario was the injury rate to that of the intervention compared to the control group in the post-primary school. And remember, it's the senior it's the senior team in the school. So we're talking about the 17, 18, 18 and a half year old. Okay. Right, Mike, if you want to move on. Okay, so I'm just going to pass it back to Jason, and he's just going to talk a little bit more about the research. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, it's very good. Just to summarize, I suppose we're briefly touched on the research, but just to summarize, the first slide that Peter would have spoke about, the information would have come from the three papers here on your screen. Okay, so Catherine Burke, John Murphy, and Siobhan O'Connor, and they all would have documented the injury rates in adolescent GA players. So again, Mike, if you just click on one and we look at Sean Kelly's study that Peter spoke about there again, the important thing to note, I suppose, when summarising this research is that Sean had no control whatsoever over the group. And basically what that means is the group warmed up as they would normally warm up. Okay, so we all know that maybe some schools will warm up, others maybe leave it to the players, others will have a hands-on approach. So that's what we need to be wary of when we are looking at these results. We also need to be very wary of that Sean was very strict on the group that he chose as the intervention. So he would have tracked the games and he would have went to certain training sessions of certain schools to see if there was compliance. And I suppose the overall message we're sending here, and we're trying to send, I suppose, is that the warm-up, GA15 warm-up in particular, not just a warm-up, the GA15 warm-up in particular can reduce our training injuries and reduce the risk of injuries up to 45% in that chosen group and up to 30% in that chosen group. Okay, now we're not saying that that can be the same for your group, but it's very, very evident that this stuff works. Okay, and what we're going to do over the next couple of slides is actually go through what is in it. And we might remember at the very start, at the introduction, we had an injury prevention and we had prep to perform. Okay, so what we're trying to do is we're trying to link the injury prevention exercises to our GA15 warm-up. And hopefully by the end of this presentation, we will have a fair idea of what that looks like. Okay, Mike. So that brings us on then. That's the research. And again, if you do have any questions on the research, feel free to use the chat box or the functions there available to you. So I suppose when we were putting this together, the first thing we both asked each other was, why would you warm up? How can we improve our team, I suppose? Okay. And we both came to the conclusion, well, warm up is number one in that area. So the first thing, and first of many things that it can increase and it can help us with is, it prepares the players. Okay, some players, if we're talking about senior, 20 and minor, you know, some players are coming from long journeys, they're sitting down all day, they're working. Okay, they could have strenuous jobs on building sites, etc., etc. Then if we look at the child and the youth, you know, they're sitting for 6-7 hours of the day in schools, they're sitting on buses, they're sitting when they come home to eat their dinners, you know, so there is injury risk there, you know, because the more you sit down, obviously, the less mobile you become. So we're increasing range of motion. We're also increasing the body temperature. Okay, and that's very, very important for when we're going to go training or when we're going to go play. So increase the muscle elasticity. Okay, so what does that mean? So effectively, the warmer our muscles are and the warmer our muscles become, okay, the better we're going to jump, the better we're going to sprint, the better we're going to change direction, because our muscles have that bounciness now in them. Okay, and that's simply from raising the body temperature. Okay, we reduce injury risk, which we've just documented. It's been shown, not in GA studies, but it's been shown in studies across rugby and across soccer and across many other sports, that it improves reaction time of players. And in certain studies in basketball and in rugby league, it has been shown as a performance enhancer, okay, for the players. So there's some of the reasons why we would warm up. Okay, so Peter.
Thanks, Jason. So guys, Jason, we've gone through the research. We've looked at why we should bother with a warm-up with our players. Now we're just going to look at how we're going to do it. So that's what we're going to look at here in the next slide. We're going to look at what is actually in a warm-up. So the protocol that we use, or the framework, or whatever way you want to put it, we basically use a ramp method. Ramp. Okay. Now, if we all think of a ramp, okay, at the bottom of the ramp, or think of a hill, it's easy at the bottom. It's low intensity. But as you climb the hill, as you climb the ramp, it actually gets more intense and more intense. And that's exactly how our warm-up should look like. So at the beginning, we said in the previous slide there, Jason has said it, the body temperature is low. They've only gotten out of the car. If it's an adult player, they might have travelled from work from Dublin, coming down to Laois. They're slow, they're laborious. So it's a gradual build-up. Okay, so however long your warm-up is, it's less intense at the start, and it builds to a high intensity. Ultimately, one of the reasons we do a warm-up is to prepare the body for the demand of the game, of the training, whatever you're preparing them for. So that's what the analogy there of the slope that you see in front of you there, in the green slope. So it starts low intensity and it builds and builds and builds. So there's four sections to the ramp framework or protocol. The first one is raise. Ultimately, what we're saying, raise the body temperature. Okay, that can be done with a ball. Okay, it doesn't have to be. It can be a fun game, right? The next one then is activate. Okay, we'll go through these in more detail on the next slide. Mobilize. We got to get the joint moving. Ultimately, that's what we need to do. So we're getting the joints moving, and then ultimately perform. Then is where when we're getting the body, the muscles firing for the demand in which we're going to face it within the next 10 minutes, which is the game or the training. Okay, so guys, as I say, we're going to go into these four now in more detail and what we put into each of them. So Mike, if you'd like to move on again, please. Okay, so just click one there, Mike, please. So this is the what. So the raise, okay? So the raise can be a jog around the field, okay? If you have a warm-up area, it can be a jog around that warm-up area, okay? It can be all different directions, but the key is it's low intensity, okay? So it's slow paced, okay? You may include a ball, you may not. You may do a fun game, you may not. It really depends on what you want to do. The one thing with the raise, once it's low intensity, you can do whatever activity you want. You can keep changing that to keep your warm up with a bit of variety inside it. Okay, so that's the raise. That takes 4 to 5 minutes possibly. Now we have activate. Okay, so think of the muscles in the body like a light in the room, right? So the light is on the particular room that I'm in at the moment, right? So if I want to activate that light, I've got to go over to the switch and switch it on. Okay, so that's what this section does here. It switches on the muscle. It turns on, it wakens the muscle up. So there's loads and loads of ways of doing that. We've just mentioned some here. So mini band sequence, okay, very, very important, okay. A lot of players that we meet at development squad level, 14, 15, 16, especially the 14, they don't know what a mini band is. Okay, so we need to be doing this stuff in our club. So squat, lunge, glute bridge, hip hinge. There's lots in there. Any basic movement, any resistance training movement, functional movement is good. I noticed on the call tonight we have a couple of clubs who are doing some of this work on video with their players at the moment. That's exactly what we need, because we want these players proficient at these exercises. So when we bring them into a warm-up, that they understand what to do. Mike, if you just want to move on again, the third one then is mobilize. So we said in the previous slide, we've got to get the joints and the body moving in certain ways. Jason alluded to the point that players travel again, they get out of the car, they're stiff. Kids are sitting down all day, they're stiff. The movement, we have to fire up the body to move properly. So again, different exercises we use there. The world's greatest stretch, okay? Inchworm, another one. Okay, squat to stand. Okay, monkey squat can also be called, lateral lunge. And the final one then is power and speed. So what we're doing here is ultimately we're really ramping up the intensity of the warm-up. You can see when you compare the power and speed exercises there, the jumping, the landing, the sprinting, you notice that they're really evident in a game that we play with the kids or with our players. So really, it's real game specific stuff here. Game activity. Okay, we're looking for intensity. We're looking for sharpness. We're looking for explosiveness, speed. That's what we're looking for here. But guys, it's So Jason was talking about this area today. It's important that we do the first 3 sections in order for us to prepare our players for the 4th section, which ultimately the power speed prepares them for the match. So it's a domino effect. That's what we're trying to explain here. And sticking to the exercise in that sequence will be good. Okay. Right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand you back to Jason. And Jason's actually going to go through the raise and the raise and the layout of maybe what your pitch would look like in a warm-up scenario. Okay, Jason?
Yeah, and I suppose what we're trying to do here is we're trying to just slowly peel the layers back of what it is in the warm-up. So if you remember 2 or 3 slides ago, we would have simply put up the ramp framework. Okay, so there's our framework. Peter just went through what's actually in those ramp exercises. Now what we're going to do is actually show you how to do those exercises, okay? So Mike, if you just want to click on a couple of times there's 2 diagrams that will come up to the left and to the right. So again, there's effectively 2 ways, in a nutshell, we can raise our team. We can raise them in straight lines, linear, or we can raise them multi-directional, okay? The image and the writing to the left of the screen is a multi-directional type warm-up, okay? So I'm sure we've all done this. We've all seen this. We'll divide our players into groups of 2s, 3s, 4s, depending on numbers. All the players can be in a certain zone. Players are jogging around the pitch and they're striking or they're hand passing. Their heads are up, they're calling for the ball, and they're just slowly raising that body temperature. Again, like Peter spoke about, it's very important that this is below 40% of the players in terms of their max. Okay, players are jogging slow, and you as the coach, you can be calling different calls. So for example, one that we would use, and it's used all over the country. So your players are in your 3s or 4s. Let's say they're in 4s. You have them striking or hitting the ball or hand pass the ball for 30 or 40 seconds. Next thing, the coach blows the whistle and they have to get into 3s. They do that for another 30 or 40 seconds. The coach blows the whistle. They have to get into 2s. So all of a sudden, they're listening, they're reacting, and you're slowly building up the tempo of your raise. Okay? So that's our multi-directional type. The other type then, okay, and there's advantages and disadvantages to these, which I'll go through. The other type of warm-up that we can have is a linear straight line warm-up, okay? So we're dividing our players. Again, we don't want big queues, so maybe 3 or 4 players max behind each of the cones, and we're just going through the standard exercises that we would all use: jogging, skipping, side shuffling, high knees, butt kicks, backwards, skipping, okay, all those exercises, and we're just repeatedly doing those over a number of minutes just to make sure that the body temperature comes up. Okay, now the advantages, I suppose the big advantage to a linear warm-up like the straight line here that we're speaking about is you as the coach can take a step back, maybe 5 or 10 meters, and watch all your players' techniques. You as the coach can see what players are giddy, what players are tuned in, what players maybe you need to speak to, depending on the context of your training session or your match. And that would be the big advantage, I suppose, we would see over the multi-directional. Now, that's not to say we don't use or we don't recommend the multi-directional. What we would say is maybe for variety and for players input and for players buy-in, that maybe 2 or 3 weeks we do one and then we switch and we switch back every now and then, okay, just to give the players some variety. So there are some of the examples that we can use for raise. Okay, I'm sure everyone on the call has seen this and has done this. The next thing we move on to then is the activate. So Mike, if you just want to blast on there, couple. And I suppose if we just focus our attention to the diagram or the training card on the bottom left-hand side of the screen. And I suppose it's at this point we want to make you aware that we are going to give you a lot of exercises now and we're going to speak about a lot of things, but just don't worry about it, because what we are going to do is send you all these resources tomorrow. And we're going to send you a ton of resources tomorrow, but we're just going to speak about them now. So Peter briefly touched on the band marches and the band exercises. Again, it's something that we would be pushing and we would recommend every club. It's a fantastic investment. There's a band there for €2 a head, okay, and it's something that the club will always have for all their teams. And again, it's something we would recommend, but it's nothing you can't do. There's nothing you can't do without the band. You can do all the exercises. So we can do our squats, our lunges, our glute bridges. the bottom right hand corner there is just a single leg reach, okay, or a single leg RDF. And as long as we stick to those exercises, they're the key, we'll say primal movements they're called. So your squat, push, pull, lunge, and hinge, okay, and then your brace as well, which would be your core. And they would be the main exercises for our activate, okay. And it's just it's important to note then, like Peter said, and use the analogy of switching on the light. That's effectively all we're doing here. We're doing exercises to get blood into our muscles, to wake our muscles up, and just to fire them up, okay? And then after this, Peter is just going to move on to mobility and why that's so important.
Thanks, Jason. So guys, after we now have the players warmed up, we're moving through the intensity. We've now got them going through their RT patterns or their functional capacity. Mike, you might just go back one there. Thanks. Now we just need to focus on the joints and getting the joints moving, right? So as I previously mentioned, so it's the world's greatest stretch. Okay, so it's a hip dominant exercise, looking at getting rotation into the back of the shoulders. Okay, we're looking at the inchworm. Okay, so we're looking at stretching all the posterior chain right all the way back from the backside all the way down to the heel and the lower back as well. Good flexibility there, and we're just getting into the plank position and back into the raised position again. Okay, so and you're moving along. So if you're doing your linear, for example, you might have a cone at 0, you might have a cone at 10 meters. They're doing those exercises from 0 cone to 10 meter cone and turn around back again. If you're doing multi-directional, wherever they find a spot in their field, they're doing their exercise. Lateral lunge, in the activation, you did a linear lunge or a forward lunge or a step lunge. This one here is just a different type of lunge, really. Okay, but any of the RT movements are good here. But what you might notice too is that the mobility exercises are sometimes a little bit slower than the other ones. That's because we're working on the joint point joint approach to mobilize the joints. Okay, and again, we have resources there that we'll send you tomorrow on the mobility work. Mike, if you'd just like to move on again. Okay, so then the final part of our ramp framework then is the prepare to perform, or the power and speed, whatever way you want to call it. So we just said we put in some sets and reps, so jumping and landing. Okay, so if you go to Croke Park, if you go to any of the county grounds and we watch our county team play, okay, especially in Croke Park now, if you're sitting in the stand and you're a coach and you've your coach sat on and you're looking out, and you might notice that the players are doing hugely dynamic work. They're doing a lot of sprinting, they're doing a lot of gameplay, they're doing a lot of jumping and landing, twisting and turning. What you have to understand is that those players have done the R, the raise, the A, the activate, and the M, the mobilize, underneath the stand that you're sitting on for the last 20 or 25 minutes. So if you're wondering, is this the start of their warm? No, they have done time. They have prepared the body to do the preparation phase. So that's what we see out in Croke Park. So just be mindful of that. So we have our jumping and our landing. We've all different directions: vertical, horizontal. Okay, double leg, single leg. Okay, max speed. So it's important that we protect the hamstrings, protect the calf muscles. So it's important that we bring our players through 2 to 3 sets, couple of reps of maximum sprints. Okay, and you can see there again the direction is important. Linear is straight line, A to B. Okay, multi-directional, cutting, all the different things. Okay, acceleration and deaccelerate. Remember, if they sprint, they're going to automatically deaccelerate. So we're looking at both. Okay, and then of course we're going to play a game. So it's important that we put a game into our warm-up. And it's only at this point, if we run our warm-up well, it's only at this point that they're prepared really to play a high intensity game. Okay, and again, 60 to 90 seconds, 1 or 2 sets. Okay, high intensity, preparing for the game which they're going to play. Okay, but it's important to say the last 2 points to make before we move on. It's important to say that the raise, the activate, and the mobilize section of our warm up, that prepares our players to do this high intensity stuff. This all those squatting and lunging and world's red stretch, they allow us to get the body to sprint safely. They allow us to put our players in a 5v5 condition game that's high intensity. And then the game, the jumping and landing, the sprinting that we do towards the end of our warm-up, that prepares the player to meet the demand that he's going to face or she's going to face in the game that we're going to play in the next few minutes. Okay? So there's a sequence, and we're just trying to map that out as clearly as we can tonight. Okay? And again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to use the chat function. Okay? So I'm going to pass you back to Jason, and he's just going to wrap things up. We're nearly there. Okay? Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, okay. And I suppose there's just, before we even touch on the conclusion, there's just a couple of really important points that we just really want to get across on the call. I suppose we've really documented, I suppose, a warm-up here tonight, okay? And you're probably thinking on the call right now, what's this got to do with injury prevention? But just bear with us for a second, okay? So what we documented tonight is what a warm-up we would imagine, okay, and what the research actually says, works for injury prevention. In the current circumstances, I suppose it becomes even more important, that we do our warm-ups now. Players are coming off an unprecedented break and an unprecedented time frame where they just haven't had this before, and there's going to be niggles, there's going to be soreness, there's going to be players who aren't used to running, okay, as much as they'll tell you that they have been doing something. So that's another thing that we really need to be wary of. Normally, we would say to coaches that, this warm-up should be done in 15 minutes. But what we're saying tonight is that, for the first 2, 3, 4 weeks that we have our players on the ground, we would be advising that you extend this warm-up and you extend it by 5, 10 minutes if needs be. And how we would do that is, Mike, if you just go back to the activation and the mobility slides there for me while I'm talking. So we would just increase the amount of sets and reps that we would do in those activation and mobility exercises. Okay. So, yeah, exactly. So that do it there, Mike. So certain exercises like this, we would increase. So if normally you were going to do 1 by 8 on each side, for example, that'll do, Mike. Normally, if you were going to do 1 by 8 during your 15-minute warm-up, well, what we're advising you to do for the first 2, 3, 4 weeks back with your players is to increase that to 2 sets or 3 sets as the weeks build up, and gradually increase the load of your players. Okay, and that's hugely important in the period that's coming up to us, because we all know that the fixture schedule is going to be condensed, and we all know that there's going to be players playing maybe with 2, 3, 4 days rest and recovery. Okay, and so we need to be wary of that, and we need to extend our warm-ups. The other thing that's hugely important, especially in this time and always, but especially in this time, is that at the end of our warm-ups, okay, we expose our players to some maximum speed work. Now, for the first week or 2 weeks, we would advise that coaches on the call build it up. So maybe they go 70% and 80% on week 1, they go 85 on week 2, they go 90 on week 3. And then by week 4, we're building up to 2 to 3 maximum speed exposures at the end of their warm-up. And it's so important, because sprinting, believe it or not, actually prevents injuries in players. But we just don't do it enough. And that's why we see a lot of hamstring niggles popping up. So we can use this nearly as a vaccine. Think of sprinting as a vaccine for our hamstrings, okay, going forward. And I suppose, just going back to the injury prevention side of things then. So what we would say to you, to everyone on the call, is obviously we're not going to have a period now where we can go out, like traditionally we would have a winter break and we would have a block of we'd say functional movement training where we would be able to do our injury preventative work. Obviously we don't have that now, but if we think long term and we think potentially to next season, the resources for activation and the resources for the mobility side of things that we're going to present tomorrow through email, sets and reps and building those up over time again is what we're talking about in terms of injury prevention. Because again, as we've seen from Sean's study, this stuff does work. So I suppose just before we finish off, I hope we got an understanding of the why, how and what, and as we said, the examples will be sent to you in the meantime. Peter, have you anything to add on that before we close it up?
No, guys, just want to thank you for your time. It was short, but a warm-up is always supposed to be short. Players want to play. Players want to get in the ball. But ultimately, for them to do that in a safe manner, we just need to warm up. So the warm-up has to be condensed, but yet we have to get the work done in it. So just want to thank you for your time. If there is any questions there, just put them into the chat. But just the take-home message for me is, if you're sitting there now in front of the computer and you're going back with your under 15s or whatever age you're going back with, you're under your 17s or you're under 13s, like, and you say, right, I'm going to implement this warm up. Well, then the first thing you need to do is you need to sit down. You need to write down RAMP, and you need to decide what exercise you're going to do in what section. The first thing you may decide to do is, right, I'm going to go off and going to buy mini bands. Right, great move. Go and buy the mini bands. It might take you 2 weeks to get the players using mini bands properly. Okay, if you took that from this call, that's a great that's a great step forward. Okay, and start introducing the players to the exercises. And the final thing, Jason, before I go, the other thing I would say is, Jason has mentioned load and he mentioned reps and sets. All those exercises that we've listed, and you'll get the PowerPoint tomorrow in email. Those 7 or 8 exercises under activation, those 4 or 5 exercises under mobilize. If you can, we don't expect you to fit all of those in. Pick a selection and work through them each week, vary them, and try and coach them as well as you go. So you don't have to, Rome wasn't built in a day, but it's all about just starting the process, really. So thanks very much for the call. You have my email, you have my number if there is anything. And Jason, thanks very much.
Yeah, perfect, Peter. We just had a couple of questions there, which is great. Just before we finish up, Thomas Brett and Andrew Murray both just would like to have a quick summary of the cool down. So we might go through that. So again, like the warm up, there's probably different ways to cool down. Okay, there's the traditional method of static stretching. Okay, and it's something that actually myself and Peter were chatting about a good bit over the last week or two when we were putting this together. There's the static stretching where we bring our players into a circle, or we bring them to the end line or whatever, and we hold our hamstrings, we hold our quads, we hold our grinds for 20 to 30 seconds, because that's what the research tells us is best in our cool downs. Okay, and that is one method. The most important thing when we are planning that is that we start at the bottom. We start with the calves. We go to the hamstrings. We go to the quads, the hip flexors, the glutes, working our way up to our lats, our chest, our shoulders. Okay, and we spend adequate time on each of those muscle groups. Okay, and that is one way that the research tells us to cool down. Okay, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And more recently, the research is suggesting that, you know, we can do that method, but we can also send the players home or send them away after training with a mobility program that they do and they complete in the morning time the next day. Okay, and that has been shown to be just as beneficial. Now, the research is limited in that, but it's just to make everyone on the call aware that that is what recent research is saying. But to answer your questions and to give you a summary of it, if we go a muscle by muscle approach and we start from the bottom to the top and we prescribe 20 to 30 seconds, we would say that would be sufficient for the cool down. Would that be fair to say, Peter?
Yeah, and guys, just to reiterate really what Jason's in there, the other side of that is some players have poor flexibility, which is important too to work on, and the cool down allows you to address that issue. Also, there's no harm at all in a cool down putting some of the mobility exercise, the world's greatest stretch, for example. That can be a static stretch also, but we're still working on mobilizing the joint. So there's no harm in putting that exercise back in again, for example. And there's loads, use all the resources there, YouTube, there's loads of mobility exercises out there that you can also, and we can't, like Jason has said it, we can't ever do enough mobility work. Our players always need mobility work. So
just another one for you there, Peter, then as well.
Yeah.
Clifford just asked, how long before a match is it recommended to finish your structured warm-up?
yeah, so what I would say there is the minimum amount of time as possible. So some teams do their warm up and then go into the dressing room, for example, maybe put on the jerseys, have a chat with them, you know, get them sitting down again, and then back out in the field again. Preferably, once they're out, warm them up straight into the game. So I'd be saying minutes, Jason. That's what I'd be saying to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose I would agree fully. And just to follow up from that, like we're seeing more and more these days with clubs and counties that, you know, part of their warm-ups now are actually happening in the dressing room. You know, their activation exercises, their flexibility exercises. So we all know by now, and we've all been told that static stretching pre-game, okay, is not an effective way to warm up. But we also know as coaches that certain players like to do certain things to get them ready. And who are we to tell them? You know, all we can do is advise them. But what I would say on that is, to answer and follow up with you, Peter, the minute our warm-up finishes, the minute we finish with our max sprint exposures, okay, or our small-sided game exposures, I would be saying 30 to 40 seconds, players walking into position, okay? The manager and the coaches would have their message given to them by then, okay? They're walking into position and they're ready to go. And that would be my advice for any warm-up. And again, if there is any more questions, guys, please feel free to pop them into the chat. But just before I hand you back over to Mike, on the screen here, there is certain resources, there's certain links, and again, all of these are going to be sent to you. So tomorrow we're going to send you the resistance or the injury prevention cards with all the exercises, the prepare to perform cards. We're going to send you video links to linear and multi-directional warm-ups, and we're going to send you mini band exercises that you can use with your teams. So again, from my own point of view, I know Peter has thanked you already, but from my own point of view, I'd just like to say thanks again for attending, and I'm going to pass you back over to Mike.
Thanks very much, Jason. My mic is still on there, is it?
It's working, Mike, yeah.
Okay. I'm back on camera there as well, am I?
The survey slides up, Mike.
Okay.
Yeah, you're there now, Mike.
Okay, very good. Okay, so thanks very much, Jason. Thanks very much, Peter. I'm going to be sending resources all day tomorrow, it looks like, but look, that's I suppose the detail that's required, and there will be a big block of information there. I also mentioned, I suppose, I'll be sending out the information that was released by the GAA last Friday, that 15-page document under the safe return to Gaelic games. And basically, I suppose, look, the warm-up there and the physical exercise side of things is certainly one area that we can work and we can plan to maintain the social distancing, and it's probably one of the easier areas. The difficulty is going to come for us, and again, once we do get detail and we get out and we get outlines in terms of what the activities will look like, we'll be back on webinar again and we'll advise everybody on those. The people may be aware at the moment, folks, I suppose there's been a lot of correspondence about the Gaelic Games coach survey that's out there at the moment. So I'm promoting that again tonight. For those of you that are on the call already and I know have completed a survey, thank you very much for that. I would encourage everybody just to take the 12 to 15 minutes to complete that particular survey. So it's a good opportunity for everybody to have their say. Look, it's the first time, I suppose, that a coaching survey to this extent has been carried out. At the moment, I'm reasonably happy with where the numbers are at in Laois, averaging out at about 6 people per club at the moment, but clubs have more than 6 people, no doubt. So I would encourage everybody on the call to complete the survey. In turn, I would ask you, please pass it on to any other coach that you may be working with, or even somebody that's coached in the past. You don't have to be a coach right now. If you've coached in the past, or even if you've intentions of coaching in the future, the GAA, they want to hear from everybody. And yeah, I am happy enough with where it's at the moment with Laois. So again, if you don't mind, that will be another link that will be added to the email tomorrow. Potentially we'll have to receive more than one email, I would think, tomorrow, with all the information that's going to be there. it probably won't take that volume, I suppose. So the received information with the resources that the lads have outlined tonight, and then in turn you'll receive the safe return pay document along with the link to the coach survey. So I would encourage everybody to do that survey and to pass it on, please. So folks, I think that's it for tonight. Again, apologies. I heard a few beeps there. I couldn't see the people that were joining late, but I know that there was a few issues there. I spoke to people just before the meeting. I had correspondence with people just before the meeting that weren't able to get in. So again, apologies about that. Whether it's a Wi-Fi issue tonight or what it is, I'm not too sure. But all the resources will be sent out. The recording is available. If you know of somebody that was due to tune in tonight and for some reason just couldn't get into the meeting, the recording is there. It's available. Please contact me and I'd be more than happy to forward it on. Thankfully, folks, look, we're coming near the end, I suppose, of our webinar stint. Hopefully, we'll be back out in the pitches again, and as long as everything goes as it should do, we will be back out in the pitches again at the end of June. So that's pleasing to all of us, and we're all looking forward to getting going again. So I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in over the course of the last few months. Only for the people at the other end of these webinars and our jobs, ultimately, folks, for the want of a better term, will be made redundant, no doubt. So you're the people that kept us going, you're the people that kept us motivated in terms of preparing these presentations, getting information out to try and get people involved. So I really, really do appreciate everybody tuning in and listening to what we have to say. Again, look, it's been a pleasure, and we're very, very lucky that we were able to carry these out using technology. So I'm delighted with the response that we got. I'm delighted where we're at, I suppose, in terms of the engagement that we're gathering with people within the clubs, and even at a personal level, I was able to even email back and forth with people that I may have not been in contact with before. So that was brilliant for me as well. The more people that I can get to know and the more names I become familiar with, then it's obviously going to it's obviously a good thing for us all, I suppose, and ultimately we just want progress. We want progress every day, be it at club level and a squad level and everything else that's associated to J in Laois. We want to make progress, and that's what we're going to strive to continue to do, folks. Okay, but without yourselves, without the people of Laois, and without the coaches in Laois, then ultimately we don't matter. We don't matter. It's you and it's the coach, as the coach, that makes a difference. So again, I can't thank you enough for tuning in, to joining in with us, and for your correspondence with us. So we'll sign off on that for tonight, folks. Again, if there's anything that you do need, please pick up the phone, send an email, whatever it may be, and we'll do our best to help everybody out. So again, thank you all very, very much, and we'll speak to you all soon.
Thanks, lads.
Cheers. Thank you.